Well, good morning, everybody. Did you get a good rest? I surely hope so. We got a chock full week of amazing music, conversations here, shared meals, master classes, beer, with Haydn in the background. I'm at the Esterhazy estate next door. It's my great pleasure to welcome my good friend, James Ehnes, to the Banff International String Quartet Competition. James, welcome.
Hi, thank you. Thanks, Barry. Thanks, everyone.
I trust all of us know James through his concerts in Canada. Without a doubt, he is the most successful violin soloist, string soloist in our country's history. And he is a regular guest here at Banff. He's performed recitals, he's performed with the Quebec Symphony, he performed as a soloist when we had the Banff Festival Orchestra in our summer programs. And he's deeply committed to working with young artists. We've done a number of projects together. He's a guy that always says yes, if it's possible, he will do it. Examples of that are during the pandemic, when we had our musicians desperately needing inspiration and being stuck in their homes, or being unable to access international faculty. We reached out to James when I was wearing my Royal Conservatory of Music hat and asked him if he had time to do some master classes. And incredibly generous with his time. And I think one of those classes was from a cabin somewhere where he had repaired and was...
I was serving a quarantine, actually.
He was serving quarantine?
Yep. Yeah, I was doing my 2-week Canada quarantine.
And we're already going to go down some rabbit hole, but during that quarantine, I don't know what you would have done during quarantine. I watched Netflix. I can tell you. I quarantined I had an unbelievable number of quarantines because I was going back and forth between the States and Canada, and every time you cross the border, it's 2-week quarantine, as you were dealing with. I think I spent 10 weeks in quarantine over the course of a year and a half. And we could talk, wow, there's some great series on Netflix. But this guy uses his quarantine to learn Hindemith Viola Sonata and then post it on Facebook just to make us Netflix string watchers feel even worse about ourselves.
The internet was a little spotty at that cabin, so I had to have something to do. Yeah.
So my lecture is going to be called Jewish Guilt in Barry's Life. It started with my mother. But in all seriousness, James doesn't have an off switch. So during the pandemic, he was doing whatever he could to continue performing. He turned his house into a recording studio. He recorded from his home, not little trinkets, but the sonatas and partitas of Bach, the solo sonatas of Isai. And these are legendary recordings, all created during the pandemic. Curious, honest show of hands, in this audience, how many have been to a performance of James Ehnes live anywhere?
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you all. Wow.
I just
You pay my
love
salary.
that.
That's amazing.
Right. So, yes. And the interest in bringing James, of course, to this event is that not only is he deeply invested in all of the repertoire of a solo violinist, the recitals, the concertos, the touring, but he's a really deeply invested chamber musician. And we'll talk about that over the next hour. You'll have some time at the end to ask James questions. But just to set the stage, for those 3 people in the audience that haven't been to a concert by James Ehnes, could we take a listen to that Bruch excerpt that we ripped off the internet?
on so-and-so. Thank you.
Well, no surprise why you've all gone to James's performances. Tell us what that, that was Brook Concerto, first concerto.
Yep.
Where were you performing?
That was in Auckland, New Zealand. That's an orchestra I've gotten quite close with over the years. The principal bass player that they showed there for briefly is one of my really good buddies, and it's a nice place to go. I'm actually going to be back with them at the beginning of December. I'm really looking forward to that. I think that was from maybe 2018, 2019, so not long before everything got closed down. But
And you have a
memories.
good association with New Zealand, right? I know you've been on the jury in Michael Hill competition.
Yeah, that's
which is a very big international violin competition.
Yeah, I haven't done so many of these juries, but I've actually been down there for that Michael Hill competition twice. Of that friend of mine, the bass player, it's his wife that actually runs it.
Okay.
So it's an excuse to go see them, and they can usually coordinate it with a trip to the Philharmonia, and so it's I enjoy having the opportunity to go to a place and actually settle there a little bit. And it seems like New Zealand is, it's far too far away to just kind of drop in and play a Brook Concerto and leave. So being involved with the competition there was a way to get to explore the island a little bit. It's down in the South Island, Auckland,
Okay,
where I
right.
generally play is
Right.
in the north. So happy memories. Nice to see that again.
Now, for those that don't know your background, give us a bit of a quick version of your early years growing up in Canada.
Yeah, well, I grew up in Brandon, Manitoba, and maybe some of you
Anybody
have
here from
spent time
Brandon?
in Brandon. Anyone from Brandon?
There we
Oh,
go.
Excellent. Yeah, well, Brandon is. Well, I think, as Canadians, we all are kind of aware, at least, I would like to think, of Brandon, a small city in the southwest corner of Manitoba, and a remarkable city in the Canadian music scene. It has had this wonderful kind of legendary music program at Brandon University for many generations now, and it was kind of the dream of this wonderful Canadian pianist named Lorne Watson, who set up this very high-level music school with the idea, I think it was sort of following the model of what had been and continues to be so successful in Bloomington, Indiana, with Indiana University, how not every student wants to go to a big city like Toronto or New York or Philadelphia, or wherever we think of these kind of iconic music schools. For some students, it's a much more valuable thing to be in a place where they can get more, maybe more direct attention. There's a smaller student body. I guess that doesn't apply at IU. It certainly does at Brandon, but and a place with maybe fewer distractions. But of course, the downside of that can be that that you just aren't able to experience as much great music as in a big center, and that was something that Brandon did a remarkable job with. Bringing people through, traditionally it's kind of one of the stops on the Cross Canada tour. If someone played in Winnipeg, and if they were going to play in Calgary, Brandon would say, "Hey, why don't you stop a night over here?" And back when I was like a little kid, that was actually the trains did stop in Brandon, so that did happen. But there was this incredible violin teacher there named Francis Chaplin, who I am one of many professional musicians to have come from his studio, and I was very lucky that my dad, as the trumpet professor there, he and Francis Chaplin were best friends.
Yeah.
And my dad was far too respectful of his older colleague to say, "Oh, hey, do you want to listen to my my 8-year-old boy?" But talking about like Banff connections and Alberta connections, it was Lise Elson came through Brandon when I was, I think, about 8. And I played for her, and I remember I played for her in my dad's studio, and she called Francis Chaplin from that phone and said, "I want you to listen to this boy," and he did. And yeah, so I was really lucky to be in this musical family at the BU School of Music, and that is really what it felt like, and it was very close to being literally my family, because it was all my parents' closest friends. on the
Just for
faculty there.
some of you that may not know, Lise Elson, that was a remarkable violin teacher that lived in Calgary and taught a huge swath of Canadian violinists that went on to phenomenal careers. Some that you might, well, Annalie Patpatanakun comes to mind from the Griffin Trio, who now is one of the directors of summer music programming here. So that's just one example, but there are countless. So, no, that's nice that you have strong Canadian roots.
Yeah, and I mean, we're probably mostly Canadians in this room, right? Where oh no, maybe
How
not.
many,
Right.
okay, how many non-Canadians in this?
Oh, wow. Well, nobody told me that it was full of foreigners. Okay, well, then this might be funny to the non-Canadians, but I mean, in the Canadian music world, nothing is ever more than like 1 degree of separation apart. And so you mentioned Annalie. So one of the great things that happens in Brandon at the School of Music at Brandon University is the Sophie Carmen Eckhart Grammaté competition for new music, and the winner of that competition in, I think, maybe 1984 was Annalie. Who then, I got to know later as a great friend. But yeah, so we all know each other. I remember I was at a party one time in New York as a student, and it was not a musical party. It was just a party. And there was some really wasted guy that came up to me, and he said, "Hey, my buddy says you're from Canada, and I know this guy from Canada." And yeah, he's like, "Yeah, his name's Doug, and he's from Toronto or maybe Vancouver." And I was this close to being like, "Sir, we are a country of 35 million people, blah, blah, blah." And then I can't remember what it was, but he said one more thing, and I was like, "Oh, Dougie, I know him, yeah, sure." So, yeah, I mean, it happens.
It's funny, as I'm thinking about Brandon, one of the very first concerts I did after I left the St. Lawrence Quartet, I came here, and this Griffin Trio invited me to join them on a tour. And I was playing viola on that tour with them. And one of the first stops was Brandon. And I don't remember the concert so well, but I do remember that I was tasked with driving the van and drove it off the road into an unbelievable amount of snow. It just, we were driving the highway, and suddenly we were just not driving on the highway. We just went, gunk.
Yeah. It's a rite of passage.
Oh yeah. I can still hear the cellist of the trio, Roman Boris, in the back, who was busy. He was running a festival at the time, and we'll talk about this soon. He was on his computer running the festival, and I was driving, and he looked up, and he realized I was no longer on the road. But I didn't know that because everything's white. It's just white everywhere. And I remember him screaming, "Don't slow down!" Anyways. People wonder where viola jokes start. That's where they start. Did you, as a kid, grow up playing chamber music in Brandon?
Yeah, it was something that was recognized as an important part of development by the faculty at BU, and I played in a quartet where my brother was the violist. And the cellist was this great guy named Chris Olsen that went on to be a professional cellist in Copenhagen. And the other violinist was Emily Bowman, who now plays in the Stuttgart Radio Orchestra. Wow. So, yeah. And
amazing.
Yeah, that was my first experience with quartets. And I was, I don't know, maybe 9 or something like that.
Yeah. But chamber music's become, I mean, at least it appears what I've seen of your career, it's become a bigger and bigger piece of what you've been doing.
Yeah, I mean, it's well, I think that maybe that's somewhat of a reflection of, I mean, I always tell young musicians that the best thing that you can hope for as your career progresses is to have a better and better sense of control over what it is you do, and for me that manifests as the combination that I need of all the different bits. I think of it like a piece of a pie, and whether it's quartet playing or mixed ensemble chamber music or concerto work or solo violin work or recitals with piano, or even, finding chances to play within an orchestra. Like, all of those things are a part of that pie, and if I'm missing any, then I'm just a little bit less happy.
Yeah.
And I think that I mean, of course, it's all music, and it's all specifically playing the violin or viola. Like, that's, in a narrow sense, that's what it all has in common. But I think that all of those different kinds of playing are just, instrumentally complementary. Like, I'm sure you would agree, right? That I think that sometimes people have this misconception that, like, say, if you play quartets, that you just play quartets and that's all you really need to do, and that's kind of self-contained. But I think it's great if, any quartet violinist, if they can play a recital and play a concerto and, play in a larger ensemble, play some solo playing. I mean, all of it all sort of exercises slightly different instrumental muscles, and I think that every one of those things makes you better at every other.
Yeah, I know that in my time with the quartet, when we were in our early years studying, first in Toronto, we were still studying individually. And then when we went to New York to work with the Emerson Quartet, we each studied separately solo repertoire and did recitals. And it does make you, your playing improves. It brings different aspects to your playing. And I remember going to visit the cellist David Finkel, who was the cellist of the Emerson Quartet and one of the directors of chamber music at Lincoln Center and music at Menlo and all sorts of things. And the Emerson Quartet were playing at Carnegie Hall that night, and I went there to pick up something from his place. Lived around the corner, and I ring the doorbell at his apartment, and his partner Wu Han, the wonderful pianist, answers, and I hear this this muted sound, like somebody screaming, and you're like, is everything okay in this? But it's muted, like maybe they're in the closet, and they need help, and she gives, and I said, just quietly, is everything okay, Wuhan? Is David here? She goes, yeah, he's here. And I'm like, I'm thinking, must be an armed robbery in progress, and poor David's in the closet. And I said, what's that noise? And she goes, oh, he's practicing. But so you got to see this. So she lets me in the apartment, and she opens the closet. And David Finkel was playing his cello, and he had towels wrapped around the cello so that it didn't make too much sound, which I thought was really nice. He didn't want to bother his neighbors, but that was not why. I said, what the hell are you doing? And he was practicing Shostakovich cello concerto. I said, well, that's cool, but you guys are playing, he goes, oh, no, it's if I'm playing at Carnegie Hall with the quartet, the last thing I want to bring is a really quartet sound. I need to find, a solo sound, and I just find it's a lot better when I'm working on solo rep. Okay, that's an extreme example, but I think there is something to. I remember once going to a master class of Dorothy DeLay, the violin teacher. Of course, you know Dorothy, who was at Juilliard, and she was she's trying to be funny, but somebody played, and she goes, you're at chamber music camp all summer. You have no more sound. And I was like, okay, but there are things that happen in quartet, and there are things that happen in solo playing, and you want to bring both of those together. You have an actual quartet.
Yeah.
You don't just have pickup groups, so you do a lot of that too. Tell us about the Ehnes Quartet.
Well, I think I'll back up a little bit, because one part kind of needs the other, just in that there's an organization that is very important to me, where I'm now and have been for the last basically dozen years the artistic director of the Seattle Chamber Music Society, and
Yay!
and the Seattle Chamber Music Society was formed in 1982 by a wonderful American cellist named Toby Sachs, who had basically, for family reasons, she was actually, I think, the second female member of the New York Philharmonic. Amazing woman. The family reasons it ended up out in Seattle, but she was always a New Yorker, and she missed her friends. So she started a little festival to invite her friends out so that they could play. I mean, it really was like musician play date. And that grew and grew and grew and grew. And in 1995, so this would have been, maybe December of 1994, I got a call. I remember I was at a hotel in Victoria, I think, and I got a call, and it's funny how that was a long time ago. The phone rang in my hotel room, and I answered it, and it was someone I didn't know. Like, all of this seems like ancient.
Yeah,
It doesn't
nobody
happen
calls the
anymore.
hotel. It's
Nobody
true.
calls
Yeah.
anymore. I picked up, and she was like, "Hello, this is Toby Sachs, and do you want to come play chamber music at my festival in Seattle in July?" And I said, "Okay." So I went out there in the summer of 95, July of 95, and I've not missed a summer since. And so that has been a huge part of my life. And then, as I mentioned, about 11 years ago, I took over as artistic director when she retired. And it was really through Seattle that, I would say, certainly in those early years, 80% of the repertoire that I was doing was new. And that was really how I got to know the chamber music repertoire and got to really love the chamber music repertoire. And now in a situation like that, you end up playing, it's one of those funny things, we've probably all heard people talk about this or maybe had the experience ourselves, that you can put together a trio and you can put together a quintet. But in the middle, it gets harder. And quartets are a particular kind of challenge, and it's mysterious in a way, and there are particular challenges and there are particular rewards. And the rewards are obvious to all of us, that's why we're all here. But basically, with some exceptions, I wasn't really getting to know the quartet repertoire the way I wanted to through my association in Seattle, through the other chamber music work that I would do throughout the season. Because frankly, much of that music was the type of thing that it just takes a little bit more time to put it together properly. Like it's just, and I'm not saying that, it's not that it's harder, it's not somehow that people lower their standards when they play other repertoire, but one can put together a really successful Brahms sextet with great colleagues.
2 rehearsals, good players.
Yeah, you put it together, and it's not like, well, but it would be so much better if you lived with it for months. It's like, no, you can do something really, really respectable, but you take away one of those cellists, one of those violists, and say, okay, we're going to play one of the Brahms quartets, then you got a problem, and it's probably not going to be all that good. So as I was kind of getting older and gaining, I would get back to this idea of control over my career, and as I was having more control over how I was going to spend my time and what I wanted to do, I realized that I was never really going to know the quartet repertoire unless I was inside it. And I'm not at all saying that this is like a blanket statement for people. I'm not implying that if you don't play in a quartet that you can't really understand the repertoire. But for me, that's the way that I really understand the piece, is from being in it. And I had realized that we'll go back to say 2009, maybe something like that. And the number of Beethoven quartets I had played and performed properly, I think would have fit on one hand. And I thought, I'm in a very lucky position where if I want to, I can find a way to make it happen so that I really know these pieces. And I thought, I've spent a great deal of time with the music of Bela Bartok, but I thought, how am I going to really know the Bartok quartets? And in a way, if you don't know the Bartók quartets, do you really know Bartók? Like, kind of not. So it was Beethoven and Bartók really above, it's the wrong way, it's not above, but they were at the heart of why I really wanted to start exploring quartets. So this group of friends, we got together to just play a concert in Macon, Georgia. We were like, okay, we're gonna play a concert. So, you know, and this was so clearly, it was a concert for us. Like, if an audience wanted to come and listen, well, that's great. But, you know, this is, you do your thing, we'll do our thing. This is, so our first program was Beethoven Harp and Bartók 4.
Ooh.
So it's like diving into the deep end. And it was just one of those things, we were just gonna play a quartet concert, just have a little bit of fun. And I think it was about 20 minutes into the rehearsal where we all started thinking, oh, we've got to do much, much more of this. And then, yeah, and so that led to, you know, the last decade of really, really nourishing experiences for all of us, where we have, you know, done cycles of the Beethoven quartets and the Bartók quartets and the Brahms quartets and the big Schubert quartets, and you know, there's a lot of repertoire to get to, and I still feel like you can play quartets for a lifetime and only scratch the surface, but it starts to feel good when you're getting your arms around the repertoire, and I feel like quartets, it's such an interesting medium, and has become such an important medium for composers that I think that it is a very interesting glimpse into who they are and what they do. And just even from a textual point of view, like, if you know Beethoven through the piano sonatas, you know from here to here. If you know Beethoven through the violin sonatas, you know from like here to here, and then whoop, there you go. And if you know the symphonies, you know kind of from like here to there. And if you know the quartets, then you know everything. Yeah. And it's funny how there will be these little secrets that reveal themselves, you know, where with all composers, I think, where it's like the little interesting bits of notation that you're like, aha, I've seen that before, and I think I know what that means, and I think I know, because I mean, notation is such an imperfect science. I mean, it's silly when you think about it, right? Like, the nature of music has this emotional auditory experience, and the fact that there's any written language for it at all is astonishing. And then the fact that each composer is basically supposed to use this same imperfect written language to express the inexpressible it's kind of a silly idea, but it's the best we have. And understanding the way that each composer really uses that little code, I think is such a key to unlocking the emotional intent. And getting back to, you know, quartet stuff, that because certainly any composer post-Beethoven, but, you know, maybe post-Haydn, since the quartet has been considered such an important medium for them, I feel like there's a particular amount of care that is put into that. So you really, you see how the mind is working, and I think that applies across all music.
Well, I've loved getting to know a bit of the Ehnes quartet, and in fact, I finally met your second violinist,
Amy,
who was visiting the festival I run down in Rockport, Massachusetts. Her husband was playing, and so she.
Did you guys not remember meeting before?
Well, she reminded me.
Okay,
yes,
yeah.
She did remind me. So thank you for that. So I apologize because I'm not technically very savvy, and when I identified the next clip you're going to see, which is just a small clip of the Ehnes Quartet, the skills of ripping it off Facebook resulted in quite a good audio experience, and do not adjust your set. It's unusually grainy, but here is a little taste of the Ehnes Quartet. So
short and sweet.
that clearly was a recording. It looked like a recording session or a recording.
Oh, this is a wild story.
Yeah, let's hear this.
Okay, so in
First of all, wait.
August.
Who can identify that piece that we just heard? Ooh. Ooh.
That is the last thing that Beethoven ever wrote. That was the replacement finale for his Opus
Opus?
130. Oh, sorry. I
gotta
teacher,
say,
pick
te-
me,
you know-
pick me.
You guys got rusty in the pandemic. Okay, all right. It's just Monday.
Yeah, so that's the end of the replacement finale for the Opus 130 quartet, which is the one that has the grand fugue at the end, and his friends were like, no. And so yeah, that's the last thing he wrote. Such an optimistic thing. So in 2020, because it was the 250th birthday of Beethoven, we had a totally unique idea that no one else across music industry thought of at all, to do a little celebration of Beethoven. And we had a few cycles of the quartets planned in various places, and as you'd imagine, most of them fell apart. We did end up actually getting to do a few of them, well, a couple of them sort of streamed and all that nonsense we were going through in that time. But we had identified a period in August where we were all going to be free to record some stuff together. And we had everything set up to go over to, it's a hall in the UK where I do a lot of my recording work, and my favorite producer, my sort of regular guy, when I have the choice to pick my producer, it's always this great guy, Simon Kiln, in London. And it was all arranged, it was all set, and then COVID hit, and so it's March, and we're thinking, well, surely it'll be fine by August. And then it's April, and it's like, I think it'll be fine by August. By June, it was like, yeah, this isn't going to happen, is it? So we were all together in July doing some filmed concerts, and basically we realized we weren't going to be able to get to Simon. Simon wasn't going to be able to get to us. But Amy is the director of a very elite school, it's called the Robert McDuffie Center for Strings at Mercer University in Macon. It's like an all-scholarship, very small, wonderful, wonderful school, and they have this beautiful concert hall there at the School of Music in Macon, and school was not going to be in session in August, and it was COVID, so no one was really going to be around, so the hall was available, and it's amazing the things you can do with technology. Amy's husband is, he's a fantastic jazz drummer, but he also is a recording engineer, and he basically worked out a way with Simon, my producer in London, where we recorded in this hall in Macon, and Simon was producing via a 44K live stream to his home in London.
In London. Oh, wow.
That's the same fidelity as an audio CD. So he was listening to CD quality sound in real time from London, producing these sessions, and I mean, it was just a wild time. We all kind of drove into Georgia, and the whole thing was completely surreal. And looking back on it, and we had it was Richard's husband had these just our cell phones, and so he basically set up our cell phones in different parts of the hall, and that's why you see these funny little camera angles. And so that ended up on YouTube. But because we had more time than we expected, we thought, okay, well, maybe we didn't know until about a week before what Beethovens we were going to record, because we'd been playing all of them. And we thought, okay, maybe we can record. We've got a week. We can record 2 CDs. But because we didn't have to worry about flying over or flying back, we ended up with 10 days. And we recorded 4 CDs. We recorded 74, 95, 127, 130, 131, 132, 135, and 133.
So I'll read you what I found online recently. Recently is few hours ago in the middle of the night. So this is from Strad Magazine, and this is a review of that recording session with Opus 132, 135. And let's be honest, we don't really read many reviews, but this one I think really popped. So regular readers of these columns will doubtless have noted the glowing endorsements of the Ehnes Quartet's previous releases in the late Beethoven project. So already this magazine is excited. This reverberant yet fastidiously balanced final installment allows these players to communicate their fresh and sometimes daring insights into the radical modernism of these works. Their accounts can scarcely be surpassed in terms of natural synchrony, timbral range, blend, textural fidelity, and sheer musicality. And it goes on. This is the definition of a rave review in one of the really important magazines for our industry. And to get that sort of a review for a quartet that is not a full-time ensemble is really extraordinary. So yeah, it's great. It's great that we got to see a little fuzzy insight into that. We don't have that much more time. I want to quickly move on to one more topic and then take some questions. So the story that James shared about the Seattle festival is one that I'm really interested in, because it's one that repeats itself again and again and again. You've heard me talk about that last night, possibly. You'll hear me talk about it again. The exponential growth of opportunities for chamber musicians is because of the festival model. And so many of the festivals, the successful festivals, started because of what James talked about, this idea of a few musicians just wanting to play this music, getting together, and a small audience, and a larger audience, and a larger audience. The result now is that there are literally festivals you could play daily from Memorial Day weekend through Labor Day if you just limited yourself to the Canadian and US market. Add in Europe and Asia, and it explodes. What we've seen is concert hall growth. I'm blessed to work in a concert hall in Rockport, Massachusetts, where James has played. Stunning concert hall. Started with a small group of chamber players on the weekends. It's now a 12-month-a-year presenting organization. The same people that built that hall just built a hall in La Jolla, California, for the La Jolla Chamber Music Society. The same story. Parry Sound, Ontario, we used to play in a school gymnasium. They have a concert hall because of a chamber music festival. So when people tell you, and I think there's lots of validity to what they tell you, that classical music is in decline, that the audiences are getting older, that young people aren't listening to classical music, I feel really interested in the other side of that, which is we are seeing unprecedented growth in what was the smallest niche of classical music, which was chamber music. So recitals we get, opera we get, orchestra. Those that were interested in that was that was a small piece of the pie. That's the piece that's taking off. So I feel like we are investing in the right area with this event and with providing opportunities for the young groups. As an example of one festival that James and I have spent many years attending, and we got to play together several times. We'll close with a final clip, and then we'll move to some questions. This is a performance, an ad hoc group assembled by the director of the festival, puts this group together, particularly beautiful performance, I thought, of Mendelssohn Octet. And this comes from the Montreal Chamber Music Festival, which is founded and led by Dennis Brott, who is speaking to you later in the week. He's not with us today because his son is getting married. So hopefully he arrives in a very good mood. And let's take a quick listen to, this is Mendelssohn Octet from Montreal. This is a recent recording. live concert. Beautiful. Thank you, James. You know, as I'm watching that so that were members of the Barbican Quartet, Victor Fournel Blanc on viola I saw there, Dennis Broad on cello. Well, maybe not all the Barbican.
Yeah,
Itamar,
that was the whole
Itamar
Barbican.
Zorman on second violin, and Itamar was one of the top prize, was the top prize winner when I was on the jury of the Tchaikovsky competition. And interestingly, did not take first prize. And interestingly, many of the comments on the jury was that he lacked enough of a solo presence and was an unbelievably gifted chamber musician. That was just comments on the jury, and it's interesting to see him in that. We will have another lecture at one point in the future where James and I will share stories of our experience serving on the jury of the Tchaikovsky competition under the
Who's buying drinks?
yeah, an event solely produced by the Ministry of Culture of the State of Russia with unlimited funding by Mr. Putin before things went south. So we have some great stories which we were going to keep in the vault, but now that he's trying to take over the world, it's time that we share those. And believe me, that is worth coming to BISQC. We'll share that for the next competition. And I hope you do have a copy of the. Yeah. Did you ever get the photo of him sitting near you?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
There is a.
Yeah.
James had a particularly interesting seat at some of those events.
Yeah, I was seated. One person. Putin came to the final concert, and we all had our seats up in the balcony, and show up, and there's crazy security that day, and it was like, okay, something is going on. And any of us that were Western, they took our tickets and said, we're not sitting here. And they brought us to the main floor of the Great Hall, the Tchaikovsky Conservatory. It has a center and a cross aisle. And in this row, so at the front of that quadrant, the front row there was, the American and the Swiss and the English and the French and the Canadian. We were all lined up, and then an empty seat and a very pleasant-looking young man on the end, and this, Jan Vogler, right? Yeah, so very funny guy, German-American cellist that he grew up in East Berlin, and he looks over to me, he says, Putin's sitting there, and that's KGB. And I said, Jan, how do you know that? He said, I grew up in East Berlin. I know secret police when I see it. And he was exactly right. And this was during a particularly tense time over mineral rights in the Arctic. Canadians may remember this. So Mr. Putin came in, and I just remember thinking, please don't extend your hand. Please don't extend your hand. Don't extend your hand. Like, none of us need to have photographs of us shaking Putin's hand, but I'm not going to not shake his hand. Like, I've made it through 10 days in Moscow. I am leaving tomorrow. Like, just get through. But yeah, anyway, that was.
Anyways, that's going to be our big carrot to sell the next competition.
Honorary juror.
Yeah, exactly. There we go. An enormous thank you to James Ehnes.
No, my pleasure. Thanks,
everyone. We couldn't have asked James to come and be with us for a week and not actually have a chance to perform. So in addition to listening to all of the hours of competition, he's rehearsing and will be performing in the Alumni Gala, which you have tickets to. You'll get to hear the great work of Ernest Chausson, the concert, written for the violinist Eugene Izai, another great violinist. And we're all really looking forward to that. See you up the hill. Thanks.
Thanks, everyone.